Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP. We say farewell to Dan, but don't despair, we've still got a ton of great topics to cover. We compare the handling of recent data breaches at Imgur and DJI, and what that means about our trust in their security practices. Plus, we share a bunch of in-depth guides to upgrading your security posture this holiday season, and see Dan off with some of your finest feedback and surely the world's tastiest roundup on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Welcome to TechSNAP, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems, network, and administration podcast. This is episode 347 for November 28th, 2017. This episode is brought to you by our three wonderful sponsors, DigitalOcean, Ting, and IX Systems. My name is Wes, and joining us one last time is our friend Dan. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Hello, Wes. Hello, audience.
Wonderful to see you.
And you?
You're looking especially sharp today, may I just say.
This is what I think you're referring to. This
Absolutely.
is a New Zealand swan dry. And
Can you say that one more time for us?
New Zealand swan dry. Okay. SWANDRI. Maybe two N's in it, I'm not sure. But basically, it's a bush shirt. It's all woolen. It has no zippers. It just has this up the front, and it's entirely wool. When it gets wet, it gets heavy, but it keeps you warm. It was used a lot, when I was there, it was used a lot by people working on farms and in the bush. And you occasionally saw some around town, and always saw them in the smaller towns. And it's the most New Zealand thing I wear nowadays. I did have a small swan dry jacket, but it sort of got worn out. But I
can see the appeal. It looks wonderful.
The swan dry logo has disappeared off the label in the front pocket. It's faded, but it still works. And this is what I was wearing outside this morning, this layer. It was about probably 33 to 40 Fahrenheit, which is probably about 1 to 5 degrees Celsius. And with a hat and gloves, I was fine walking around town briskly. And when I got home, I just
frozen before TechSNAP now.
No freezing. And code freezes are good. Frozen Dans are not.
Exactly.
But just sitting here in the office, it's been very comfortable, so I haven't bothered taking it off. Usually I start taking gear off as soon as I get in, but this morning it was just comfy.
Huh. Wonderful. And we all get to benefit. Anything else new in your world, or anything you want to say before we jump in?
The R710 is up and running. I got that going over the weekend. There's 4 SSDs in there, and I did a few tests, but nothing conclusive yet as to how to best set it up to build FreeBSD packages.
I see.
But it's still early days yet.
Work in progress.
Only 2 test runs so far.
Excellent. Well, congrats. That's exciting. It should be a lot of fun to play with in the future.
It is fun.
I'm sure you will tweet about it.
I shall.
Excellent. Okay, well, let's jump in. We have a really exciting show today. There's lots of fun stuff to talk about. So, first story. Imgur has had a notice of a data breach. What's
Imgur.
going on?
I always called it Imgur.
Yeah, that too.
No. You may well be right. I mean, I've never heard anyone else
cycle through the pronunciations because it's more fun that way.
So, if you're not familiar with this website, I think it was set up for the sole purpose of displaying images for Reddit.
I believe so, or at least that's how it started. Yeah, as a companion to Reddit.
Yeah, so basically you would post something on Reddit, and if you don't know what Reddit is, you should go and look at reddit.com. It's the front page of the internet, I'm told.
TechSNAP.reddit.com. There we go. We'll just start them off.
Oh, right. Yeah. Sorry. And basically what it does is it hosts photographs that then people can refer to in their posts on Reddit. It's used for a lot of other things as well, but mainly you see a lot of references to it from reddit.com. So, excuse me, what happened is there is a data breach. And what's interesting about this data breach is, A, when it happened, B, when they got notification, and C, how quickly they dealt with it. So we'll sort of approach this in terms of this is a very good way to handle being notified about being breached. And then later on in the podcast, we'll contrast that with a very poor handling of a data notification of a breach. So on November 23rd, Imgur was notified of a potential security breach that occurred in 2014 that affected the email addresses and passwords of 1.7 million users. Now, one of the things that I want to mention here is the date. This was November 23rd. Now, if you look at a calendar, that was 5 days ago. And if you're not American, you may not have been aware of the 23rd of November this year was Thanksgiving Day. And if you're not familiar with American culture, Thanksgiving is a hell of a big holiday. It's very family-oriented. It is the heaviest travel day of the year. That Wednesday before is the heaviest travel day of the year. Most of the country travels somewhere or does something on Thanksgiving. Okay?
Absolutely.
It is a major U.S. holiday. So they got notified of that issue on that day. It was in the afternoon of November 23rd, continuing on with the article.
Not a great time for a notification.
Not a great time for notifications. An email was sent to Imgur by a security researcher, Troy Hunt, who frequently deals with data breaches. And frequently, look at Have I Been Pwned. He believed he was sent data that included information of Imgur users. Our chief operating officer received the email late night on November 23rd, so in the evening. So basically, he's had his turkey, he's had his beer, and he's been watching football all
Probably
day.
taking a nap.
This is a major holiday, and immediately corresponded with the researcher to learn more about the potential breach. He simultaneously notified our founder, CEO, and vice president of engineering. Our VP of engineering then arranged to securely retrieve the data from the researcher and began work to validate that the data belonged to our users. Early morning on November 24th, that's Friday. This is the day after Thanksgiving, which is often also a holiday for most of America.
Yeah.
And by early morning, I'm interpreting that as being 2 or 3 a.m. I'm not interpreting that as being 6 or 7 a.m. We confirmed that approximately 1.7 million Imgur user accounts were compromised in 2014. The compromised account information included only email addresses and passwords. Imgur has never asked for real names, addresses, phone numbers, or other personally identifying information. So the information that was compromised did not include such information. So basically, it's email address and password. That's all that was in the dump, and that's all that they could have gotten. Well, apart from other stuff, we are still. How did this happen? We're still investigating how the account information was compromised. We've always encrypted the passwords in our database, but may have been cracked with brute force due to an older hashing algorithm, SHA-256. That was used at that time. We updated our algorithm to the new bcrypt algorithm last year.
Well, that's good to hear.
So chances are most of the passwords will have been changed by then, I would hope. What steps are they taking? On the morning of November 24th, we began notifying the users via the registered email addresses. We are immediately requiring that those users update their passwords. We also published this public disclosure at 4 p.m. PST on Friday. So that's 4 days ago. What can you do? We recommend that you use a different combination of email and password for every site and application.
Bingo.
And they also suggest please always use strong passwords and update them frequently. That last bit, not so much. It's sort of been proven lately that you don't really need to update them frequently. So that's how they dealt with it. But there's a lot more information in here. There's a lot more information in terms of how they handled it and what else they did. And I found just basically the handling of it and the timeline much more interesting. So what Threat Post posted was basically the same thing as what we've just covered. They said it was a victim of a data breach, but about 2 or 3 paragraphs down, they talk about Troy Hunt. Troy Hunt, who runs the data breach repository haveibeenpwned.com, is credited for tipping Imgur off to the breach. Hunt, in a tweet, lauded Imgur for its speedy handling of the breach notification. Hunt sent Imgur flat text file with email address and password. And Troy says, I want to recognize their exemplary handling of this. That's 25 hours and 10 minutes from my initial email to a press address. To them mobilizing people over Thanksgiving, assessing the data, beginning password resets, and making a public disclosure. So that's, over a major holiday. It only took them 25 hours and 10 minutes from dealing with it to announcing it. So that is very good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another point, out of the 1.75 million passwords and email addresses that he reported, 60% of them were already in the Have I Been Pwned repository.
Wow.
So they'd already gotten out somewhere or had been used somewhere by the people who were on Imgur. So perhaps that data, pardon me. So how that data get in there, we may not know. It may have been part of another release and not attributed to Imgur, but this one was attributed to Imgur. So now, Troy mentioned that in his tweet. He talked about that. And someone said, why did it take them 3 years to actually disclose this? Well, they didn't know 3 years ago. They found out on Thanksgiving Day. So people aren't reading the whole article. They're just scrolling through the tweet list. Now, another tweet that I saw was they were wondering what's the correct year for the breach. Is it 2013 or 2014? Well, the earlier discussions indicated 2013, which they later revised to 2014, and it's relatively inconsequential this much later anyway as to whether it was 2013 or 2014. It doesn't really matter.
Right.
Excuse me. Now, I mentioned Have I Been Pwned. Now, Firefox is coming up with a plugin. So it will notify you if you're visiting a site that has been previously hacked and whether or not their login credentials have been involved in a data breach.
Oh, really? That seems really helpful.
Now, do you remember we talked about an API for Have I Been Pwned?
Yes, I do.
I'm positive that's what they're using here.
That's fantastic. Boy, what a natural use case for this sort of data.
Yeah, you type in username and password, it checks the Have I Been Pwned. Oh, listen, you better not use this anymore because you're liable to get infiltrated.
Yeah, I try to rotate my passwords often, but there's sites that I just don't visit very regularly. But upon visiting, if you can, Firefox pops this up, I'm like, perfect, pull up your password manager, switch everything out, set it all up again, and boom, you're done.
Yep. And yeah, I do use a password manager. If you folks don't use a password manager, you really should. And later on in the podcast, we're going to go over some recommendations to keep yourself from being hacked. That's very interesting. So I don't want to ask you personal questions, but I wasn't on Imgur when this happened. I went back and looked at the first photograph I posted, and it was 2015, I think.
Yeah,
so
actually,
I know
same
I'm
for
not
me.
in that breach. Yeah.
I've not checked yet, but I will be. But yeah, no, same here. I haven't actually had an account on there all that long, so that's convenient in this one case, I suppose.
Yeah, I use it mostly for posting photographs to Reddit's Home Lab.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's a great subreddit.
When I first started getting this rack and stuff, I wanted to get some recommendations for how to set it up. So I was posting in there for a while. It is a great Reddit. It is a great subreddit.
Yeah, handy. I was struck by another tweet example from that thread post talked about here from Jake Bird. Thank you for disclosing this so quickly. Better than a lot of companies that would rather try to hide and deny it. And I think that really summarizes it. These breaches happen. We have to just acknowledge that that is part of life. Unfortunately, security is never perfect. This can happen. And so this is a great case, as you were saying, that they have minimal information in the database that was breached. And rather than try to, not disclose details, they were transparent about it, did everything they could to notify users, get things fixed, patched up, or analyze if they needed to. It sounds like they've made a lot of improvements anyway since then. But good job, Imgur.
Can we think of anyone in the news recently who was hacked and did not disclose it for several years despite knowing about it?
I think we can. Do you have anyone specific in mind?
Uber.
Right. Boy, that was actually pretty big news just somewhat recently.
Yep. That was bad.
Right, and then companies.
That also,
go on.
That also breaks certain laws, doesn't it?
I would think so. Not that's new ground for them.
I think you're required to disclose data breaches. I'm not sure about that.
It is just frustrating too. Like, they want your personal information, credit card information, all of that sort of thing.
Yes.
And if you want to be a user of their service, you want to have faith that, I don't expect them to be perfect and not ever get breached, but I do expect that I'll be notified in a timely way and that they'll be clear about what they're doing to, ensure that it's less likely to happen in the future. That's it's interesting to see this, a Reddit-associated internet image hosting company doing a better job than some of these, huge tech companies that have presence all around the world.
I want to know why. Compare voluntarily giving your information to a website such as Imgur with Equifax, where nobody gives their information to them. They hold it, and then it gets breached. So they collect all this information, and then it gets out there. You did not give it to them. They've collected it, and bang, it's out there. Good job.
No kidding. Anything else you want to add on this one before we move on in today's show?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, now it's time for our first sponsor of the evening, DigitalOcean. Head on over to digitalocean.com. There you'll find cloud computing designed for developers. Maybe you don't have an Imgur account, or maybe for some reason you just, you haven't felt like signing up, but you do still want to host files for others to consume on the public internet. My friends, DigitalOcean has a brand new product offering for you, introducing Spaces, a beautifully simple and scalable object storage service. If you go to digitalocean.com, you can go learn more about that and a bunch more about all the services they have. Their new object storage Spaces, it's great. I've used it a ton. It's really handy if you just want to generate some links to hosted content. They've got an incredibly easy to use API, S3 compatible, and it's really just, this is a case study in all of their services. They got started with Droplets. What are Droplets? They're cloud-hosted VPS. They're a virtual private server, a VM of your own in the cloud, in a data center somewhere, ready for you to use for whatever means you want. And it's not like some of their competitive services. Competitors to DigitalOcean, you got to sign up, you got to give them all the details in the whole world, and then there's a giant, crazy UI you have to navigate through. At DigitalOcean, it's all simple, straightforward, and easy to use. They have support in all the latest and greatest tools you're probably already using, things like Vagrant. There's a ton of great apps and command line utilities to manage your Droplets. I mean, we interface with Droplets all the time here at JB, so you should too. It's really one of the APIs it's an example in great API design, and it's an example in great dashboard design. They've got this incredible, easy-to-use dashboard, a dashboard that you won't come to hate. And they've got simple and easy-to-understand pricing. Some of their competitors, you have to go dig deep, find third-party tools to try to calculate what you might be spending in a month. It's all right here, simple and easy to use. Prices start at just $5 a month. And if you use our promo code, yeah, that's right, SNAPOcean, all one word, SNAPOcean, you'll get a $10 credit. That's good for 2 months of this $5 a month droplet. You get 512 MB of RAM, one virtual CPU, and it's no slouch. It's a fast little processor there, and 20 gigs of all SSD disk. DigitalOcean was one of the first to jump on the SSD bandwagon, and it's really shown. They understand the advantage. You won't have any of these old spinning rust drives sitting around. No, sir. And a whopping 1 terabyte of transfer. This is premium transfer, super fast connections all over the world. They've got data centers all over the world. So find one near you, spin up a droplet, start playing with it. They've got like one-click installs of a ton of software you might want to use. Want to go set up a WordPress? Boom, done. One-click install. And they've got operating systems from container Linux to FreeBSD, so you can be sure that the system you want to run is almost certainly on DigitalOcean. If not, you'll probably find a tutorial to install it. They've got an incredible community section of real users, and then they've hired real editors. They pay them to take these community contributions and turn them into some of the finest documentation available on the internet. If you haven't already run into an article, if you're searching for something Linux or FreeBSD related, you'll have a good chance of running into a tutorial about how to get started with that on DigitalOcean. And sure, those guides are great for not DigitalOcean too, but why would you not? I mean, if you want to just play around, install a new blog, get started with Ghost or playing around with Node.js, DigitalOcean is perfect for that. So head on over to DigitalOcean.com, use our promo code SNAPOcean, and go make something cool. Make sure you tell us about it. Thank you, DigitalOcean, for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Okay, Dan, well, we must roll on today. Lots of fun stuff to talking about. This article is not so fun, and it really is an example of what not to do.
Yes. Contrast this with what happened with Imgur. In this case, there's a chap who happened to be interested in drones, the little quadcopters that fly around. And he started looking around DJI, which is a Chinese company that manufactures the popular Phantom brand of consumer quadcopter drones. Basically, he discovered that their developers had left the private keys for both the wildcard certificate for all the company's web domains and the keys to cloud storage accounts on Amazon Web Services exposed publicly in code posted to GitHub. Now, that's pretty serious. Like, that's everything you need to run everything they have. So using this data, the researcher, Kevin Fenestra, was able to access flight log data and images uploaded by DJI customers, including photos of government IDs, driver's licenses, and passports. Some of the data included flight logs from accounts associated with government and military domains. So not only is it personal data, it might also be sensitive security information. So he found the security error after beginning to probe DJI's systems under their bug bounty program, which was announced in August. But as he continued to document the bug with the company, he got increasing pushback, including a threat under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, the CFAA. So DJI refused to offer any protection against legal action in the company's final offer for the data. So he dropped out of the program entirely and published his findings publicly yesterday, along with a narrative entitled "Why I Walked Away from $30,000 of DJI Bounty Money." And we've included a link to that PDF in the show notes. So how did this happen? Like, generally a security researcher will approach someone and say, "Hey, listen, we've got this problem here." And they say, "Oh, okay, well, tell us more." And they come to an agreement. But that doesn't sound like this is what happened here. So DJI launched its bug bounty bounty this fall, shortly after the U.S. Army issued a ban on using their drones for any military purpose due to, quote, operational security, unquote, concerns. Now, that's not trivial.
No, it's not.
There were also spreading reports of people hacking the firmware of the drones. Some have even posted hacks to GitHub. Now, but according to the researcher, the program was clearly rushed out. The company did not and has not yet defined the scope of the bounty program publicly. So when he discovered that the SSL certs and the firmware AES encryption keys had been exposed pardon, on GitHub. In some cases for as long as 4 years, and that's probably how they got cut to hack the firmware. He contacted the company to see if its servers were within the scope of the bug bounty program. He was told they were, a statement that would later be walked back from by DJI officials. So he ran another GitHub search and discovered the AWS private keys. So first he found the SSL certs and the AES encryption keys, and then he found the private keys for DJI's, have I been saying DJI's SkyPixel photo sharing service. He also learned that some of those accounts were publicly accessible, and the buckets included all attachments to the service emails, receipts, personal data, and occasional photos of people cut by props. So after his initial inquiry, he didn't hear back about the scope of the program for more than 2 weeks. He sent a follow-up email and received a message saying, for the scope, I'm quoting, for the scope, the bug bounty program covers all the security issues in firmware, application, and servers, including source code leak, security workaround, privacy issue. We are working on a detailed user guide for it. So, okay. Based on that, he started documenting what he had found in a disclosure report. And that's when he discovered personally identifying information. That's got to be the passports and the driver's licenses. In light of that, he gave the company an immediate heads up on the exposure via a friend at DJI with a better technical understanding than the people I was dealing with. So he was contacted by another DJI employee a few hours later. He informed this representative that he had the unencrypted flight logs, the passports, the driver's license, etc. He continued to communicate with this employee in a long line of education on basic security concepts and bug bounty practices, and it was over 130 emails. Okay. So at one point, they even offered to hire me to consult with them on their security. So this is back and forth communication over this. So when he submitted his full report on the exposure to the bug bounty program, he received an email from DJI saying that the company's servers were suddenly not in scope for the bounty program. This is bait and switch. Why would you say they were, then receive the full report and say, oh, no, they're not? So I have no idea why they would change, but on the face of it, it sounds like they changed their mind after they got the data of the issue. So, but despite that, he received notifications from the bug bounty program that his report earned the top reward for the program, $30,000 in cash. Then he heard nothing for nearly a month. He received an email containing an agreement contract that he said did not offer researchers any sort of protection. In short, thank you for this information. We're not going to sue you. Here's your cash. That's basically what it should boil down to. So he did not. So for him personally, the wording "put my right to work at risk" posed a direct conflict of interest to many things, including his freedom of speech, and it seemed clear to him that the entire bug bounty program was rushed based on this alone. So he continued to communicate with the DJI's Chinese legal department. Things did not improve. He soon received a letter from the legal department demanding that he destroy all data he had uncovered in his research or face prosecution under the CFAA. So now basically, instead of saying, thank you, here's your reward, they're threatening him. Then a final offer arrived. No less than 4 lawyers told him in various ways that the agreement was not only extremely risky, but was likely crafted in bad faith to silence anyone that signed it.
Wow.
Generally, when you, as a security researcher, your goal is to get your name out there, known as someone who does good work.
Right.
That gets you jobs, that gets you more work. If you can't talk about the stuff that you've found, it puts a damper on the goal to do further work. Most people say, yeah, sure, you're allowed to talk about this after we fixed it, Responsible disclosure is what that falls under. ARS, Ars Technica, that's the site we're reading from,
right,
reached out to DJI's corporate communication director for North America for comment. He responded by referring to us to the official statement issued on November 16th. The language calls the researcher a hacker. DJI is this is the quote, DJI is investigating the reported unauthorized access of one of DJI's servers containing personal information submitted by our users. As part of its commitment to customers' data security, DJI engaged an independent cybersecurity firm to investigate this report and the impact of any unauthorized access to that data. Today, a hacker who obtained some of this information posted online his confidential communications with DJI employees about his attempts to claim a bug bounty from the DJI Security Response Center. DJI implemented its Security Response Center to encourage independent security researchers to responsibly report potential vulnerabilities. Sorry, I'm quite sure that that's what he did. DJI asks researchers to follow standard terms for bug bounty programs, which are designed to protect confidential data and allow time for analysis and resolution of a vulnerability. I have trouble with that word. Before it is publicly disclosed. The hacker in question refused to agree to these terms despite DJI's continued attempts to negotiate with them and threatened DJI if his terms were not met. So that's the end of the quote. Granted, we have this version and we have the other version. But
make of it what you will, but yeah, exactly. Reading into some of the motivations on either side, it's somewhat clear, I suppose.
Yeah. So, in the statement, DJI claims to have paid out thousands of dollars to almost a dozen researchers since the program was launched. The terms of the bug bounty program posted by DJI exclude, quote, third-party websites or services, including third-party software incorporated in DJI applications. That's fair enough. If you find a bug in PHP...
Right, that's their problem, not necessarily... I mean, everyone's problem, but not necessarily bug bounty.
Yeah, but it's not... You're not helping DJI. And bug submissions, though it is not clear whether these terms were communicated to the researcher prior to his work. And bug submissions through the bug bounty program's official email address were shut down as of yesterday, as per this bounce back message received by ARS. Please note that starting 2017-11-16, we will no longer be accepting bug reports through this email. If you have any questions, please contact us at bugbounty@dji.com, and we'll get back to you shortly. So, if you want to submit bug bounties to DJI, you can through the security website. You go there, you click on the link, you click on Report a Bug, and they want you to log in. So you can log in with Facebook or Google or create your DJI account. Now, why you have to create a DJI account, I'm not sure. This seems really odd.
Yeah, it does.
Just give us an email address that we can send. Publish your email address that security researchers should use to get in contact with you.
Yes, absolutely.
Include an encryption key they can use, and that's all you need to do.
Yeah, make it simple, no barriers, easy to use, easy to. You want these reports if you're running one of these programs. It seems like you would recognize that this is valuable. It helps everyone, and can make your users safer and your product better.
DJI clearly do not listen to this podcast. Otherwise, they would have heard us recommend the example set forth by Tesla, which is very straightforward, very simple. Non-coders and non-lawyers could read it and understand it and know what to do.
Very well said.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along, we've got our next sponsor this evening, which is our friends over at Ting. Head on over to techsnap.ting.com and you'll find a smarter way to do mobile. If you've ever signed up with one of those big nationwide carriers and you felt like you were signing your life away, putting the next 2 years somewhere on paper, deciding in advance how many minutes you're going to use per month, how much data you expect to use, knowing that you'll probably never use that full amount, maybe once or twice within that whole 2-year period. My friends, there is a better way. Ting is mobile that makes sense. And really the primary reason about that is it's simple, it's no nonsense, and it's pay for what you use. Yeah, what? I know, it sounds too good to be true, but it's pay for what you use. It's the way that the whole mobile industry should already be. I don't know why it's not, and it's just a system that makes sense. So to get started, each line is $6 a month. After that, your usage puts you in one of these fancy buckets. You can just click and see. So my usage, I don't call that too many people, and if so, they're short calls. That's just, let's say you get 100 minutes for $3. Now, how many text messages do you use? I hope that's none. For me, that's none, but maybe there's a little spillage. You know, your aunt or uncle, especially around the holidays, they're sending you a text message perhaps. Boom, $3, not a big deal. And then you just pay for your data. If you're savvy, if you're a Wi-Fi savvy person, if you don't have really long commutes, or maybe you're on a bus with Wi-Fi, you probably have Wi-Fi in your office, you probably have Wi-Fi at home. So however much data you want to use, not judging here, I try to save my data, but you can use as much data as you want, and that's one of the things about Ting. However much you use, it can vary from month to month. If there's some months where you use none, there's a couple months during the summer while you're out and about and you use a whole bunch, that works perfectly on Ting because it's pay for what you use. So if you're a light user, your monthly bill would be about $22 a month. Yeah, that's right. And when you go to techsnap.ting.com, you'll get a $25 service credit after you sign up. So that'll probably pay for your whole first month's bill, or at least most of it. The other nice thing here is there's no overage charges. It doesn't work like that. You use more, Ting tells you exactly what the rate is going to be. They've got buckets for the first couple levels, and if you're a big power user, they've got just one rate to know for any of that advanced usage. So if you go over, 2 gigabytes, they've got a per gigabyte amount. It's super simple. It's super easy. You can budget ahead if you want to, or you just pay for what you use. You don't have to get locked into a contract, and you'll still get all the features you want. Tethering? Oh yeah, there's tethering. It's just data. Use the data, pay for the data. Simple, mature, easy. But you've got other things, three-way calling, voicemail, etc. All the standard stuff you'll find. What you won't find are contracts and early termination fees. And you won't find long wait times on hold. When you call Ting customer support, you'll get real people ready to talk to you. No transfers, no holds. You just call, get a person, talk to them, and they will get your problem resolved. The other really great thing about Ting is you probably won't have to call anyone because they're so simple. They've got a great dashboard, amazing dashboard. You can pretty much do anything you need on your account, activate, deactivate, change different amounts of service. And they've got an incredible app too. So if you've already got a mobile device, signing up for Ting, changing other phones settings on Ting, it's so simple. They support both GSM and CDMA, which is another factor that makes Ting somewhat unique in the industry. You can get a SIM card for just about $9. Just head over to their shop. If you don't end up using that service discount on your plan, you can also use it in their shop. You can bring your own device, no problem. They've got an IMEI checker available, or go buy the latest and greatest from Ting right at ting.com/shop. Oh, wait, no, that's techsnap.ting.com. Go check it out. Go get that service discount with our magic URL and go save some money on mobile. Everyone I've recommended to Ting really just loves it. They've got great customer reviews across the board. Go see what everyone else has already learned. techsnap.ting.com. All right, Mr. Dan, here's some time in the show where maybe we'll try to give the users, the viewers, everyone else out there some practical advice. At least it seems like that's what Motherboards tried to do with their article, The Motherboard Guide to Not Getting Hacked. Well, I don't want to get hacked, so sounds nice.
Now, I forget how I came across this guide. I actually wasn't familiar with Motherboards, so I asked around, and some people said, yeah, they're pretty good. They do a lot of their own research, and they're usually right. But it was also pointed out that not everyone agrees with Motherboard. So I included a link in the show notes to where someone says, basically, everything true that's in Motherboard's security guide is also in the Tech's Solidarity Guide, and we'll provide a link there too. Now, but to be fair, Bruce, we all know who we mean when we say Bruce. Bruce also says it's a pretty good guide as well. So I'm going to go through this one Motherboard guide, but also in the show notes, they have other security guides, which we didn't have time to cover, but people should follow the link because there's some interesting guides in there that you may find very useful. So I'm going to try and rush through this because there's a lot of stuff in here. Basically, do you want to stop criminals from getting into your Gmail or Facebook account?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Are you worried about the cops spying on you?
Oh my gosh, yes.
We have all the answers on how to protect yourself.
Hey, yo.
So, one of the questions we get asked most often at Motherboard is, how can I prevent myself from being hacked? Because living in modern society necessitates putting an uncomfortably large amount of trust in third parties.
For sure.
The answer is often not a whole lot. Take, for example, I mentioned this before, the massive Equifax hack that affected nearly half of the American population. Few people voluntarily signed up for the service, and yet their information was stolen. So, scrolling down a bit, this guide isn't comprehensive and it's not personalized. There is no such thing as perfect security, and there is no one-size-fits-all solutions. Instead, we hope this will be a jumping-off point for people looking to batten down the hatches on their digital lives. Now, I had a reference here about why this. Yeah, basically, what you should do first is go to the Electronic Frontier Foundation and go through their guide, Assessing Your Risks. There's a link to it in the show notes. And basically, different people have different risks. If you're just Joe citizens sitting at home, minding your own business, that's a very different threat model to, say, being a politician or being an activist.
Absolutely.
Or being involved in throwing over a regime. Entirely different. So judge accordingly. Not all of what we say may make sense for you, but I'm trying to be general here.
Exactly.
So threat modeling. Everything in this guide starts with threat modeling, which is hacker lingo for assessing how likely it is you are to get hacked or surveilled. So are you trying to defend against someone opportunistic who just downloads your details from another website when they're broken in there, or are they directly targeting you?
Exactly.
Two entirely different situations. If you get spam and you click on the link, they're not actually attacking you personally. They're just looking for anyone that'll click on the link. So we will summarize the EFF threat modeling. What do you want to protect? Who do you want to protect it from? How likely is it that you will need to protect it? How bad are the consequences if you fail? And how much trouble are you willing to go through in order to prevent all of that from happening? So, an example, is your threat an ex who might want to go through your Facebook account? Simple way to solve that. Make sure they don't know your password.
Yeah.
Don't share crucial passwords with people, no matter who they are. I don't share passwords with anyone. Sometimes I give them the Wi-Fi password, but they can't get anywhere but out on the internet with that Wi-Fi password. They can't get into the network here behind me.
Right.
So if you're talking Netflix, make sure you never reuse that password anywhere else. You might want to share it out. Try not to keep your birthday on the internet.
Hard to do, but yeah, good advice.
Yeah, hard to do. I fake it by always using November 1st, despite the fact that my birthday's in November. I always, anywhere on the websites that need it, it's November 1st.
And you can judge how good of a friend someone is by when they say happy birthday to you.
Right. So if you're an activist, a journalist, or otherwise have reason to fear government, state, or law enforcement actors who want to hack or surveil you, the steps you must take are significantly different if you're just trying to keep plans for a surprise party secret from your best friend. Entirely different. And overestimating your threat can be a problem too. I like this one. If you start using obscure custom operating systems, virtual machines, or anything else technical that's really not necessary, or you don't know how to use it, you're probably wasting your time and might be putting yourself at risk. So, on to the tips. Keep your apps up to date. Patch your shit.
There we
is
go.
What we say.
Exactly.
probably the most important and basic thing you can do to protect yourself is to update the software you use to its newest version. Do that as soon as the updates come out. So, and what they say, if you come away with one lesson from this guide, update, 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 or patch, patch, patch. Stay up to date, because the vast majority of infiltrations and breaches are because of known vulnerabilities in software that have not been fixed on your machine. That's what all this malware and spam is trying to take advantage of, is the vast majority of malware and spam is trying to take advantage of known vulnerabilities that have not been fixed on your computer. If it's been fixed, nothing will happen, presumably. That's the theory. So, jumping ahead. Well, one more thing. I like this line. Hacking is often a path of least resistance. You go after the easy, soft targets first. For example, the hackers behind the destructive ransomware known as WannaCry hit victims who had not applied a security update that had been available for weeks.
There we go.
Not for days or hours, but for weeks. In other words, they knew they were going to get in because the victims had not changed the lock to the door, even though their keys had already been made available to everyone. So, patch your shit. So, on to the next recommendation. Passwords. Do not reuse your passwords, because if a hacker gets control of your Netflix or Spotify password, they can use it to get into your ride sharing or bank account and to drain your credit card.
Exactly.
There you go. The good news is the solution to this is a password manager. Use a password manager, and then use a very good password to get into that password manager. So make a passphrase, several random but pronounceable and thus easier to memorize passwords.
Yes.
For example, and don't use this one, floodlit, siesta, Kirk, barrel, amputee, dice. Something like that. Just make it up so that you can remember it.
Yeah, right. I mean, here you're trading, having to remember individual passwords for one huge master password. So
yes,
you should have an easier time, less to remember. Put that effort here. And sure, it has high entropy, lots of stuff going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And pronounceable is really good. You can find some pronounceable password generators and other tools available.
Yes.
So go check those out.
Or even just a memorable phrase. Like, I really like chocolate ice cream because I once had it with Susan. That's perfectly fine as a passphrase. Just don't tell anyone that passphrase.
Right, yeah. And don't use that one.
Don't use that one either. Now, one of the points they make here, which is very important, intuitively, you might think it's unwise to store your passwords on your computer or with a third-party password manager. What if a hacker gets in? Well, you're not better off keeping all of that in your head. The risk of a crook reusing a shared password that has been stolen from somewhere else is far greater than some sophisticated, and it would have to be sophisticated, hacker independently targeting your database of passwords. For example, if you use the same password across different websites, and that password is stolen in the massive Yahoo hacks, which included 3 billion people, it could easily be reused on your Gmail, Uber, Facebook, and other websites. Again, low-hanging fruit.
Exactly.
They're gonna try your passwords everywhere else. That's all they're gonna do. So, use a password manager. There's lots of them out there.
Yeah, I like that. I like that this doesn't, it's not too, it gives you some options. It's not prescriptive about the password manager because, while it is worthwhile to discuss the merits of different password managers, really you get 90% of the protection from just using one at all.
Don't get bogged down in that. The other thing I would suggest is looking for a password manager that allows you to export the passwords.
Yes, so you can switch services later if you need to.
Now, some people consider that a security issue because what if someone invokes that? I think that's much lower risk than having
reasonable trade-off.
Yes. Next topic, two-factor authentication. Basically, what is two-factor authentication? Basically, you type in your username and password. It says, oh, well, you also have to give us this code as well. So basically, that code is something you know. It sometimes people use two-factor authentication by sending you an email or sending you a text message, but what I like much better is tokens, like two-factor authentication, such as Google Auth. There's a lot of applications out there now, other than just Google Auth, where basically they display a 6-digit number, and those numbers change over time. And what is going on there is basically there's a shared secret. The website knows the secret, you know the secret, and you both know what number will appear at a given time. That it's just very simple and random. SMS-based two-factor authentication text messages, not quite as secure as that token-based method. So if you can, you use Google Auth or Authy, or what were the other ones? There's a whole lot.
Yeah, there's a whole lot. You can go.
I like Authy. I also like 2SP, but I think 2SP is now been withdrawn.
Oh,
basically
right.
Because the guy got a job with Apple. But yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But yeah, Google Authenticator is also a popular one that's used by a large number of companies. So go find something that works for you and your use cases that's supported by the sites that you interact with. And this is a great option, especially for sites that have your personal information or other details, financial details. It's a simple way to stay more secure.
Yep. The next series of topics that we're going to go over is sometimes controversial. You decide. It says don't use Flash. Well, I wind up using Flash from time to time.
It's good. It's nice to stay away from it. Not everyone has that luxury yet. Let's hope yet.
Yep. Now, use antivirus or some sort of malware scanner. Now, it used to be very, very popular. I'm not using it. Don't target me. But there are definite uses. They mentioned Kaspersky Labs. I don't know.
Yeah.
Do use some simple security plugins in your browsers. Ad blockers. A lot of people are using ad blockers, and I use Site Block, IO Block, Origin, something Origin, uBlock Origin.
Yep.
It is in the show notes. I use uBlock Origin. It's on my Chrome browser. I tend to use Chrome all the time. They also talk about using a plugin called HTTPS Everywhere, which just basically makes sure that your connection is always HTTPS if the website supports it. They mention VPNs. They mention disabling Microsoft Office macros, and they say back up your stuff. Do anything you can to have multiple copies of your files in multiple places, and do that regularly. They talk about not posting stuff on social media that may be sensitive, such as your boarding pass.
Great example.
Don't open attachments from people you don't know, and even then, be wary of opening attachments. They give some suggestions in here about how you can handle attachments when they come in. Then they go on to talk about mobile threats. People use passcodes, passwords, or patterns to lock their phones. If you don't do this, you absolutely should. In other words, don't allow someone to just pick up your phone and start using it. They have access to all your email. They can send email. They can read all your email. Don't do it. So, and what they mention here is patterns are far easier to guess or shoulder surf than pins or passcodes, according to a recent study. Now, the biggest mobile threat is someone who has physical access to your phone and can unlock it. So be aware of that. Now, one of the things that I remember being mentioned is that if you're in a public place, be very careful when you unlock your phone. That's why I like the thumbprint or the fingerprint instead, because no one can really see what that is. And you can disable that. But the next bit of advice from them will anger some people. and it'll get some people upset.
It already has.
But yeah, we'll show you. Get an iPhone, they say. Pretty much everyone in the world of cybersecurity, except perhaps the engineers working on Android, believes that iPhones are the most secure cell phone you can get. There's a few reasons why, but the main ones are that iOS, Apple's mobile operating system, is extremely locked down. Apps go through extensive checks before getting onto the App Store, and there are extensive security measures in place, such as the fact that only code approved and digitally signed by Apple, and the fact that apps are limited from reaching into other apps. These features make it really hard for hackers to attack the most sensitive parts of the operating system. And Apple is very good at updating iOS when there's bugs, and security updates for many Android devices can take weeks or months to be pushed to users. And they point out that even the iPhone S, which launched in 2013, is still supported. 2013, that's 4 years. Possibly 5, possibly 4.5, closer to 5, depending on when the iPhone S came out. So basically, if you are paranoid, the iPhone is the most secure cell phone out of the box. But unless you have a really good reason for it, do not jailbreak it. Jailbreaking bypasses all of that security. Don't jailbreak your iPhone. Okay. Now, the other side. But I love Android. Fine. What do?
Huh.
They say your best bet is to stick to Pixels or Nexus phones whose security doesn't depend on anyone but Google. If you really don't want a Google phone, they give a list of cell phones that have a good track record of pushing security updates, according to Google itself. Whatever Android phone you install, be careful what apps you install. There have been many malicious apps found in the Play Store, so think twice about installing a little-known app, or double-check that the app you're installing is really the one you want.
Yes.
Why do we mention that? Earlier this fall, a fake version of WhatsApp was installed by more than 1 million Android users.
Yikes.
Stick to the Play Store and avoid downloading and installing apps from third-party stores, which may very well be malicious. And on most Android phones, installing third-party apps is not enabled by default. Leave it that way. So the other thing, to protect the data on your Android iPhone, make sure full disk encryption is enabled. So,
yeah, it's an option we've had now for a little while, and if you have that feature, just do it. They've worked out most of the performance kinks involved, so there's really no downside.
Yep. Now, here is an interesting example of why metadata is very revealing. Surveillance law is complicated, but long story short, both the law and current technological infrastructure make it easier to grab metadata than content. So what sort of metadata? What can they learn? Here's a very feasible example. Metadata isn't necessarily less important or revealing than content. Say Planned Parenthood called you, then you call your partner, then you call your insurance, then you call the abortion clinic. That information is going to be on your phone bill, and your telephone provider can easily give it up to the government. Your cell provider might not be recording these calls. The content is still private, but at that point, the content doesn't matter. It would be easy for anyone with the metadata alone to have a reasonable idea of what your calls were about. Now, that's an extreme example, but this is why revealing metadata is so sensitive.
Yeah, I think it can be difficult for people at times. It feels a little abstract to understand, what is the real significant? But yeah, even if extreme, this is a great example of there can be real information, inferred there. You should guard it. You should guard it carefully.
Mm-hmm. Now, they actually state that they do not recommend WhatsApp. They prefer iMessage, but iMessage encrypts end-to-end, but it also backs up cloud messages to iCloud, which is why you can message from all your devices. But
right.
Anyway, so There are worse products to use than iMessage and WhatsApp. For example, you should avoid using Telegram for sensitive comms. You can read more into that in the article here. I'm just trying to highlight the main points here now because there's so much in here. Even if you keep your privacy settings on lockdown, in other words, you only allow Facebook posts to be seen by friends, social media companies are subject to subpoenas, court orders, and data requests for your information. And oftentimes they'll fork over the information without ever notifying you that it's happening. For the purposes of social media, assume that everything you post is public. Doesn't mean you should stop using it. Just be careful or mindful of how you use it. So, yeah. I don't post anything exactly sensitive on Facebook, but I do have it locked down so that only my friends see most posts. So what other things you can do? Stickers over your cameras on your laptop or smartphone, even when you're not using it. The EFF sells removable laptop cover stickers, 5 for $5 that don't leave a residue. Lock screen. Use a passcode. Don't rely on your thumbprint alone. Make sure you have both because you may have a stronger constitutional right not to speak your password. Also, I know that iPhones, if you press the power button or the on-off button 5 times quickly, the thumbprint fingerprint will no longer work. You have to enter in a passcode. That may be useful to you one day. They talk about Tor, which will give you a big privacy boost, but don't, for example, try to stream Netflix over Tor. Netflix is already big on personal privacy, and I think most of the stuff is streaming over HTTPS now anyway. For the purposes of state surveillance, Tor is better than a VPN, and a VPN is better than nothing, mainly because VPN logs can be requested, subpoenaed. When it comes to state surveillance, VPNs won't help much. A VPN will obscure your IP address, but when it comes to state surveillance, VPNs can be subpoenaed for user information that may ultimately identify it. You're paying by a credit card, etc. I find it interesting that they say PGP probably isn't worth it.
Yeah, that is an interesting consideration. Although I think perhaps given the audience of this guide, it's not that it's not useful for some folks. I would say that for VPNs as well, there are reasons to use VPN in some situations, but don't consider it some catch-all security blanket that just won't work that way.
One thing you can do, most operating systems now allow you to encrypt your hard drive so it can't be read without you logging in. I just did that to my laptop last night.
Oh, did you? Nice.
Yeah, File Vault wasn't turned on. I turned it on.
Excellent.
Credit cards. Know that credit card companies never stand up to the government. If you pay for anything using your credit card, know that the government can get that information pretty easily. And remember that once your identity touches something, there's a chain that the government can follow all the way back. And they go on to talk about burner phones and stuff like that. Or basically, it's very difficult to pay for anything with a credit card and not have it come back to you. Now, contrast that with the ACLU and the NAACP. They have a constitutional right to resist giving up the names of donors, but your credit card or PayPal might betray you anyway. This doesn't mean you shouldn't donate to organizations that resist oppression and fight for civil rights and civil liberties. Rather, it makes all the more important that you do so. The more ordinary people that contribute to these organizations, the more that individual donors are protected from scrutiny and suspicion. If everybody's donating to them, it doesn't make you stand out. It's a normal thing to do. I donate to ACLU, and I recommend that others do as well. Scrolling down through here, then it goes on to a little bit of what journalists should do and stuff like that, but they're an entirely different circumstances from what the rest of us are. That's all we're going to cover in here. I recommend that people go through it and read the whole thing and decide which ones apply to them. Not all of them will, some of them may. And there's other guides in here that you should look at. Those are in the show notes. and go through the EFF.org assessing your risks and see what's important to you. But we've covered a heck of a lot of stuff just in there, and it's probably too much to take in all in one go. So read it.
Yeah, high level overview. Later. You have to go spend some time, dig in, set aside an afternoon to go, consider your security posture. It's a great use for a rainy Saturday. Go change a bunch of passwords, set up a password manager, kind of audit, review. I know a lot of people a side benefit of a password manager is it also creates a list of all the accounts that you have.
Yes.
A lot of times you forget that, oh, yes, I do have an account over at so-and-so. I used it once to buy a Christmas present 10 years ago or whatever it is. So there's a lot of good things to be gained.
And when you hear of a security breach, you say, oh, did I have an account there? Your password manager will tell you.
Exactly. Anything else you want to add? There's a lot. I really particularly liked the guide linked in our show notes over at techsolidarity.org.
Yes.
Mostly, they have a lot of the same advice, but really presented in a... if you don't want to do a deep dive or you just want to have a handy review checklist to look at, this is just a no-nonsense, not crazily formatted. You just kind of review a list of don'ts, a list of do's. Pretty simple to understand. I love that.
Yes.
All right. Well, as we just covered, you're going to want backups. If you're concerned at all about security, you're going to want backups. And you know what? You're just going to need some storage for that. There's no other way around it. We all have 1,001 pictures now, especially with smartphones everywhere. You have important data, maybe several gigs, maybe terabytes of data. That depends on you. Whatever size your backup solution needs, ixsystems.com is the place to go. Head on over to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP. There you'll find a premier hardware retailer like no one else. Whether you need storage, servers, or a custom solution for your business, all powered by open source, IX Systems is the place to beat. In particular, if you want to get started with backups, you're trying to improve your security, you're trying to get your systems put together this year. 2017 is the year to do it. Get your backups done. Have multiple locations. A great way to start is with the FreeNAS Mini. FreeNAS Mini, you may have heard of the popular FreeNAS software. It's open source technology. You can deploy it at home if that's what you want to do. I think that's a great option. But you're probably pretty busy. If you're like Dan and myself, you're definitely busy, and maybe you don't have time for that. The FreeNAS Mini is perfect. You get all the power of that software in IX's premium, built for the service hardware. They've spent a huge amount of time, a number of years, figuring out what works with hot swap bays and super reliable motherboards, cases, cooling, low power usage, and all tuned perfectly right out of the box. It'll show up, plug it in, ready to go, get started. Configure it, set it up. You can, FreeNAS has a ton of easy options for exposing your shares if you want to, provide network aware storage for your network NAS type solutions. Maybe you just want to have reliable backups. You can be sure it's all based on the powerful ZFS file system. IX Systems works with the OpenZFS project. They know about ZFS. They're experts. They have people on staff who've been fighting with it, battling, creating amazing storage solutions for years. They've got experts there and a team of super talented white glove sales engineers ready to take your phone call, talk to you human to human about what your problems might be, whether that's just configuring a FreeNAS or getting a bid for a new data center that you're building. It doesn't matter. They work with some of the largest companies out there. If you go to their homepage, you'll really see some of the people that they work with. People like Sony, Disney, NASA, UC Berkeley, people with huge data problems. They've also got servers, so maybe you need a new server. Maybe you're looking to invest in some bare metal. You want to set up a KVM server with ZFS as the file system. I think that's a great idea. IX Systems has got you covered there. Plus, IX, not only do they have incredible hardware and partners with Intel and their incredible Intel processors to create just the fastest, most powerful machines you're ever likely to see, they also have a great presence in the community. They've been around through .com, bubbles, and bursts. They're going to be around for the future. So you know that you'll have support when you need it. You won't be kept on hold. You won't have to deal with horribly designed websites or not being able to talk to a person or really just feel like a cog in a horrible business machine. No, you're going to get people who are excited about technology and are excited about helping you solve problems. One more thing, you should definitely go check out their blog. They've got a lot of great, cool social media presence. They're at all the conferences. They have a presence in open source. They maintain several open source projects themselves. They were just recently at LISA 2017, the Large Installation System Administration Conference, and they were also just at several BSD conferences OpenZFS Developer Summit. They get around, and they also have, they have the server envy post. So from time to time, they post some of the systems they build for themselves to test out for some of their clients. And you will be drooling. Make sure you're not standing over a server because you wouldn't want to damage it. I'm sure IX could get it repaired for you, but go check that out. You'll be really pleased, and I think it'll show you why IX is the place to beat for your next hardware purchase. Head on over to ixsystems.com/TechSNAP, and thank you to IX Systems for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. And that brings us to the feedback segment. That's right, it's the time in the show where we get to hear from you, our fantastic audience. First up, we've got a letter from Goran, writing about tape drives and jails. Hey guys, thanks for all the cool show topics lately, and reading some of my previous questions, but I got a few more, no problem. First off, tape stuff. How can I connect a tape drive to backup data from a computer or a server? I see some old drives have only iSCSI interfaces, but new hardware does not have those connectors anymore. How about via eSATA or network maybe? How can I attach a tape drive to a Dell R710, for example, to back up some VMs? Does the tape drive show up as a separate storage device? Do we need some software so we can dump the data on the tapes? Can I use a tape drive to back up FreeNAS data? These are all great questions. He's also got some jail-related questions with, can you run any kind of jail under FreeNAS, or you have to use FreeBSD for that? Does FreeNAS have some limitation within their jails or plug-in system? I hope it's not too many questions. Thanks again to Dan for posting links to his gear on Twitter. Yeah, I think we all appreciate that, Dan. As the tape drive expert, I'll let you dive right in.
Okay. Some of these questions I knew right away, and some of them I had to go looking elsewhere. So, iSCSI. iSCSI is not what you're thinking it is. iSCSI is a protocol between your computer and, say, a storage device, and it lets storage over there appear as if it's a local drive. That's the short version of it. But what you're actually thinking about is SCSI, which is Small Computer Systems Interface, which is a different thing altogether. So a SCSI card fits in say, the PCI slot or the ISA slot, and then you plug your tape drive into it. And that's entirely different. But I have SCSI devices in the computers back here, and I use them to talk to the tape drives. You just got to make sure that you match your SCSI card to your SCSI device properly, because there's different types of SCSI, such as LVD, and I can't remember the others. It is confusing. Ask others for help. Verify that what you're getting is the right one. You can find all kinds of SCSI cards, and I guarantee you will find the SCSI card you need for the device you want on eBay. It'll be reasonably priced. No, not eSATA or network. Generally, no, you don't connect to your tape drive that way. I have actually only this past week connected a tape drive to an R710. It's in that rack right back there. It is a Dell TL4000 LTO4 tape library. Is connected via an 8087 cable to a SAS card in the R710. Works well. Haven't actually used it yet, right, but I used the same card in another Dell, a Dell R610, and it worked just fine. It shows up as a separate storage device. So on FreeBSD, it shows up as device SA0 for the first tape drive. On Linux, it shows up as a ST0.
Oh, okay.
Now, do you need some software to dump the data on the tapes? No, you can actually use TAR, which is tape archiving.
So you need some software, but you probably already have that one.
Yeah, you want to use Bacula. You want to use Bacula and Postgres to do your backups to tape. So it's a higher entry level, right, but you will be happy with it. Now, this is a bit I had to ask others. Jails under FreeNAS. I looked at the documentation. There's a link in the show notes, or I will add the link to the show notes. Jails under FreeNAS are basically jails under FreeBSD, but you really, really want to use their GUI interface. Do not start fooling around with the jails from the command line, or you will be unhappy. if pardon me, if jails are your primary purpose under FreeNAS, instead maybe you should choose FreeBSD and have FreeNAS as being your storage device. If you want to make use of jails, I'd recommend using FreeBSD straight rather than FreeNAS. You got to decide what's your goal, jails or storage.
Right. Yeah.
And use whichever one is your primary. It's a little bit harder to upgrade jails under FreeNAS. But yeah, if that doesn't help, ask more questions.
Perfect. There we go. Thank you very much for your wonderful question there. Let's move right along. In follow-up to our containers and jails episode, Samir sent us a link to an article over at datamation.com from old friend of the network, Matt Hartley, talking about Linux containers and virtual machines. So if anyone's curious more about some of the differences, this article does a good job of highlighting some of the use cases and differences between those. Go check it out. Then
that is very nice. Yeah. That is very nice.
Then Jonathan Davis sent us a link to this hilarious mug, Schrodinger's immutable law of computer backups. The condition of any backup is unknowable until a restore is attempted. That is so true, and really just a good reminder to go check your backups, do a restore. If you haven't done a restore, You really don't know that it works, and then you have nothing.
Yes,
and you don't want to be that guy with the terrible story about he thought he had backups. Turns out the backups were corrupted, or they weren't being taken anymore. The cron job was silently failing. All of those have and do happen to people, so don't let it happen to you. Okay, and then moving right along from the Coding Cowboy, I will miss you, Mr. Dan. Just wanted to write and tell you that I will truly miss Mr. Dan on the show. He has so much knowledge. However, I know that what it's like to want to pursue other areas, but your plate is already full and something has to give. I know these shows are a lot of work, and I do appreciate what you guys do. Anyway, it's sad to see you go, but I will keep following you on the Twitter and your blogs. Again, thanks for all your knowledge sharing. Have fun, Coding Cowboy. Well, thank you, Coding Cowboy. I'm sure Dan appreciates that very much. We're all sad to see Dan go, but he's doing lots of other fun things. Go to some of the conferences he helps organize. Follow him on Twitter. Lots of fun ways to stay in touch with Dan.
Thank you.
We've got one more feedback item today. This is from Stephen K. Hey guys, I just want to start saying I'm sorry to see Dan leave. You've been an incredible source of information and news. To my question, I'm going to be making some changes to my home network and how I access my devices. Currently, if I'm outside my network, I use Chrome Remote Desktop to access a Windows 10 machine that is always running some Windows-only applications. They don't work at all in Wine. That's unfortunate, but we've all been there. The setup works well enough, but I want to try and remove my dependency on Google to access things on my LAN. I recently started playing with reverse SSH connections and was wondering if I could use this in conjunction with the DigitalOcean Droplet. Ideally, I would like to set up where I could have server.example.com point to the DO droplet and have home.example.com bring me to my home server. Is there any way to keep the reverse SSH connection up and reconnect to it after an internet outage? Not that uncommon in my area. I guess I need to know if this would be reliable enough where I can access things on my LAN. This would mostly be security cameras and accessing media and other items on my NAS. I think we've all been, scared to have your connection drop and you can no longer access your house and you suddenly, all my things, I was relying on that, or that one time that you really need it. And is there a way so that I don't need to treat my DO droplet as a jump box, SSHing to the DO droplet, and then in the droplet SSHing into my home server? Thanks, guys. Boy, okay, so there's a lot there to unpack. I agree, wanting to remove Google from that dependency chain is a very reasonable idea. So you say you started playing with reverse SSH connections and is wondering if there's a way to use this in conjunction with the DigitalOcean Droplet. So ideally, you could go there, and this would just forward you right to your home server. I'm not sure there's a way to make it quite that direct. Now, probably the easiest thing to do would be to have it set up so that your home server is always making an SSH connection to your. Well, I guess you could. I'm not sure if you would want to. What you could do is configure SSH. Normally, this isn't allowed, but change your SSH config to allow the forwarded port to listen on the wildcard address on your DigitalOcean droplet, and then you could have a scheduled task of some sort, however you're going to schedule it, that triggers an SSH connection from your home server to the DigitalOcean droplet and then forwards its SSH port to the DigitalOcean droplet and listens on the wildcard address so that connections from the internet are accepted. You'd probably want to put that on a different port just as SSH would already be used. If you have an SSH connection, you have to move one of the ports, basically. Then you would be able to SSH directly through your DigitalOcean droplet to your home server. That's the most convenient case. There's also, if you just want to forward it and have it sit there locally, not exposed to the whole internet, you might get some more security that way. There's some pretty easy things you can do with SSH config settings if you're always using SSH so that, you don't have to manually do 2 SSHs. The jump happens without you having to touch anything. So that would be fine as well. If you need more robust than just an SSH port, if you want to have other network settings, I would look into SSH's ability to set up a TUN interface. So you can do layer 3 tunneling over SSH. Again, this is an SSHD config change that you'll have to do. It's not enabled by default for security reasons. But really, there's a lot of VPN-like options. Actually, there was just a good discussion this week on the internet about that. I will provide that link in the show notes. So I almost brought it onto the show, but now it's more relevant than ever. So hopefully that answers your question. Yes, you can do it. You're just going to want to forward your port and modify the settings. I will link to the SSHD man page and documentation. You can go read about some of the settings in the show notes. So hopefully that helps you, Stephen, and good luck with your Google-less SSHing. Anything you want to add, Mr. Dan?
In his last paragraph, he says, is there a way so I don't have to treat my DO droplet as a junk box? Look at dynamic DNS for your home connection so that when your connection drops, dynamic DNS will update the host name. Okay, so that home.example.org is always up to date for that domain. That's usually free, and you can buy something relatively cheaply. I think it's like $5 a year or something. You can find some very good solutions. But yeah, dynamic DNS will allow you to go straight to home and bypass the droplet altogether.
Absolutely. That's a great point. Hurricane Electric in particular provides that as a free service. Pretty easy to set up. I have a cron job that runs a curl to keep my home DNS up to date. So yeah, that's a great point. Dan sidestepping the question entirely. I like it. If anyone else has any tips they want to do or alternative suggestions, other helpful tools, there's so many of them available. We just can't keep track, and we rely on you guys to keep us straight. So thank you very much. You can send contact information, or you can send us feedback at jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact, techsnap.reddit.com, or find us both on Twitter. Now, Dan won't have anything, he'll be doing his own things in the future, but you can still harass him.
Yes, you can.
That's it for the feedback segment. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with the roundup. And that brings us to the final segment of today's show. Sad though it may be to see Dan go, he's still got some wisdom left to depart with us. We'll extract that last bit of wisdom here in today's roundup. First up, the potential impact of the Intel Management Engine vulnerability. This is an article over at Matthew Garrett's blog.
Yeah, I think we only briefly covered this issue a few weeks ago, only as a roundup item. But basically, I'll just read this one paragraph. Intel's Management Engine, ME, is a small coprocessor built into the majority of Intel's CPU's chipsets. Older versions were based on the ARC architecture.
That's hard to say.
Yeah, running an embedded real-time operating system. But from version 11 onwards, they've been small x86 cores running Minix. Ooh, cool. That's Andrew Tannenbaum? I think I have the name right. Sorry if I don't. The precise capabilities of the ME have not been publicly disclosed, but it is at a minimum capable of interacting with the network, display USB input devices, and system flash. In other words, software running on the ME is capable of doing a lot without requiring any OS permissions in the process. So read the rest of this article. It goes into a lot of details of what is possible. This chap here is a power management mobile and firmware developer on Linux. it's easy to say that I think he knows what he's talking about.
He definitely does. He spent a long time looking at firmware level things, helping develop some of the EFI utilities that exist in the Linux world and many other things. So definitely a voice of someone to listen to in this space. Okay, well, moving right along, there's a lot there. It may show up on a future TechSNAP, but go get a head start checking that out. Here's a handy tool I was looking at. I haven't really tried it yet, but it's on my radar for this week. Sanoid? How do you think you say that one?
I think it's Sanoid.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, it's a policy-driven snapshot management and replication tools, mainly aimed at ZFS, but they have explicit plans to support Btrfs when it becomes more reliable. Primarily intended for Linux, but BSD use is supported and reasonably frequently tested. Now, that said, there's another one. In the same show notes, there's a link to ZFS Tools, which is a FreeBSD specific. Well, I say FreeBSD specific because he says it's an open Solaris-like and compatible auto snapshotting script, which also supports auto snapshotting MySQL databases. And it was written by one of the FreeBSD committers, Brian Drury. I think this is the one that Alan Jude uses, and I remember chastising him for it because it uses Ruby, but now I'm not so hung up on that detail.
That's adorable. I love it. Yeah, it just seemed like, ZFS has a ton of great options available for snapshotting, taking backups, all of these things, and I was just looking at some tools. In particular, Sanoid has some integration with the KVM hypervisor for if you want to use that storage for virtual machines, so that's something I will be playing with. Perhaps we'll talk about more on future TechSNAP.
That's something
roundup.
And I want to start using ZFS tools. I want a policy-driven thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope you do, and please write about it.
I will.
So next up, staying over in the BSD landscape, the NetBSD blog, they're always doing interesting things, and they've got a great post up about the strongest KASLR ever. They recently just had talked about their implementation, but they've done a bunch of new work, and this article dives into what that is, how it might work, and why it's secure.
Basically, the existing design had several drawbacks. One leak or one successful cache attack would be enough to reconstruct the layout of the entire kernel and defeat KASLR. But the new design significantly improves this situation. Basically, each kernel ELF section is randomized independently. So instead of randomizing all the components, you also randomize the components internally. So each separate section is randomized. I may be describing that wrong, but that's the idea.
Yeah, and so KASLR is kernel address space layout randomization, so that that the kernel, where the kernel resides in memory, is not fixed and static. It is randomized, making attacks harder on particular memory regions. So definitely a worthwhile thing to pursue, and a great write-up. Even if you haven't if you haven't studied this stuff before, they do a reasonably good job of diving into that. They've got some great diagrams, so really the roundout item to do a deep dive of your own. Now, next up, kind of in the same vein, better random number generation for OpenSSL, libc, and the Linux mainline. This is a post at Amazon's AWS blog. They've done some work recently on S2N, a new open source implementation of the TLS and SSL protocols, and they've been contributing some work back from that. So it's interesting to see that it's definitely interesting work, and there's some particular highlights, Dan, I think that you were interested in.
Yes, let me read this two sentences that they have here. But what's really interesting for us is that in the course of working on libc, we were also able to get traction on another important change in Linux itself. Last year, we suggested a new M-advise option for the Linux kernel. Based on OpenBSD's M-inherit 0, the option marks memory regions as wipe on fork, which means that those regions are zeroed in a child process immediately after a fork call. Why would anyone care about this? basically, if a fork happens, the child doesn't get to see what was in there before the fork occurred. Basically, it's sanitizing the memory before the child process gets to use it. And that is a good thing because it can't then read stale stuff, for example, which might include sensitive data.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe there's keys hiding in there or other things.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, yeah, Amazon does all kinds of things. This is pretty interesting, and they've done a lot of great work on S2N in particular in terms of making it a minimal, reliable, secure implementation. They've done some work to try to prove it secure or prove it compliant with their spec. Lots of good stuff there. So go check that out if you haven't heard of S2N before.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now over at Amplitude's engineering blog, how a single Postgres config change improved slow query performance by 50x. Wow, that's quite the statement.
Yeah. Yes. Well, Postgres haters will say, oh my God, you have to tune it like that to get 50 times faster? It's 50 times slower if you don't do things right?
Right.
Well, yes, it is. With great flexibility comes a great many configuration options. In this case, basically, it's statistics based. When you figure out what's good for one join, it's called a query planner. And the query planner is very intelligent, but sometimes it makes errors because the default install assumes you're running off hard drives, which means that reading a whole bunch of stuff may be easier than doing the index. So go away, Siri. Basically, if you use the default configuration and you're running all on SSDs, sometimes the random page cost versus the sequential page cost is skewed. So,
right, okay, that makes sense.
Playing around with those options, particularly in your environment, may give you much better results. And the graph shows that. Basically, they get a lot better once they acknowledge the fact that their install base was not default or did not match the defaults that were given. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can only really have the one default configuration. You try to make it as widely applicable as you can, but especially for something as niche and important as databases, that's difficult. And I think it is reasonable, especially in that regard. If your database is your bottleneck, if you're in the space of using it in production, monitoring it, watching it, then it's pretty reasonable to have to do some configuration for your specific use case. So it's great that those knobs exist.
You want your default install to come up and work so that someone at least gets it running. Once you start getting into the specifics of your app, you really should change the default values.
Exactly. And as you said, the query SQL is a descriptive language. It has this query planner to actually figure out how the heck you're going to run those queries, get the information out of the database. And it really can't be perfect. So if you can give it additional information to make better plans, that's a good thing. Okay, so we talked about Troy Hunt at the start of the show. Let's jump right back there. He's testifying in front of Congress in Washington, D.C. about data breaches.
Yes, he is.
What should he say?
I think he's already figured that out because this blog post is from 6 days ago, actually probably more days ago than that because he's on Australian time. He's actually in the U.S. now. He's going to be testifying on Thursday, and the reason I included this post is that you can watch it live on the internet. It starts at 10:15 Eastern Time, November 30th. And there's a link to the live stream in the show notes. I encourage everyone to watch and listen to what Troy will say before Congress, because this affects a lot of people. Basically, he's going to be talking, the title of it is Identity Verification in a Post-Breach World. There's going to be a lot of very interesting things coming out of that. There's also Jeremy Grant and Ed Merzinski. He's basically, So have a look.
Yeah,
it should be interesting.
These are some big names with important opinions, and I hope the legislators, heed their advice and take it seriously.
Yes.
But we will have to wait and see.
Yes.
Okay, so something a little lighter. Next up is a minimalist guide to tbooks.
Now, have you used Screen before?
I have.
because I used to use Screen a lot, but I've moved over to Tmux. Basically, imagine that you've SSH'd into a computer and you've started a long process. Oh, damn, I can't log out. This is going to take hours. What am I going to do? Well, you could background it, but it may not work. If you start it in Tmux, if you start a Tmux session, then start your long-running thing, you can disconnect from Tmux, break your SSH connection, and when you SSH back in again, you can go back into the Tmux session. It's like a little virtual world that you're attaching to, and it's very useful for stuff like that. You can also start a Tmux session, connect to IRC, and have that sitting there running while you disconnect. It's very useful for that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a terminal multiplexer. So think a window manager, but for the terminal. So long-running connections, it's useful. You can just have multiple windows and multiple panes. So if you just want to lay it out better, you don't want to open more, actual terminal emulators, that's a great option as well. And there are still a few things I do use Screen for, but Tmux has pretty much entirely replaced it, and I think is the thing to beat these days. It's tunable. There's lots of configuration options. I would go take a look. There's a lot of good people who've posted their Tmux configs that you can pull and learn from. If you're not already using it, check it out.
I've not used the panes yet.
Oh, yeah.
But I do use it. I do use it.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and Screen can be set up to do a lot of the things Tmux does, but Tmux just has a really good, sane default configuration. So install it with whatever package manager you use on your servers, and thank us later. Okay, so we've got one more roundup item.
Yes.
Over at NetTrack, here's a graph showing SSL issuer popularity. Now, does anything stand out to you about this, Dan?
Yes. Let's Encrypt has gone from about 5% of domains in May 2016. And a year later, where is May? Let me find May. There's May 2017. They're up to 30%. And now, which is just November of this year, 37% of domains that they looked at used Let's Encrypt.
Wow, that's some pretty good growth.
Now, compare that to Komodo, which was 19%. So they're more than twice as popular as Komodo. Now, the thing to keep in mind here is this is just a percentage of sites. It doesn't tell you, okay, back in May of 2016, how many sites were using SSL? In other words,
correct.
All these people that are now using Let's Encrypt, were they using SSL before or not?
And especially with Let's Encrypt's use cases and ease of use, you can imagine that there's a significant portion of them who are new to the SSL landscape.
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure there's still going to be a huge market for SSL paid certs.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I know that I think all of my domains are now using Let's Encrypt.
It really was that missing piece that could enable SSL everywhere. Now you can get it for free with reasonable ways to automate it. There's no longer an excuse of, I don't want to pay just to, especially if you're not transmitting secret information. But as we know, SSL provides more benefits than just the encryption over the wire. Yeah. And so go get it done.
Yeah. And the automation side, you'll never want to install a cert again once you've used Let's Encrypt. It's so easy. It's in there and it just works. Remember to monitor it, but it just works.
Still, I was about to say, like the old ways, you had to set up a monitor to then go to tell you, a human, to go do some cert replacements. Now it's still important to set up your monitoring should anything break. We would never say that, but hopefully you will only have to get involved in serious incidents. So a lot better. Go check them out. Let's Encrypt. And that's it for today's roundup. This has been a whole ton of fun. Dan, thank you so much for everything. Is there anything you want to leave the audience with here on your final episode?
Get involved with net neutrality. That's a big issue, and please let your legislative people know your feelings about it.
Well said. Where can people find you in your post-TechSNAP period?
dan.langell.org is my main blog, and they can find me as dlangell on Twitter. If you just search for Dan Langell, you'll find me.
Perfect. All right. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for all the time, energy, and wonderful things you've shared on this program. It's been a ton of fun getting to know you and being your co-host here, and I really look forward to all the other things you'll be working on. And hey, if you want to come back on anytime in the future, we could definitely set that up.
Short, deep dive topics or something like that, I'd be happy to do.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
And thank you very much, Wes. It's been a pleasure.
Of course. Good luck and best wishes. And everyone else, stay tuned to see the next iteration of TechSNAP. It should be a wild ride.
Thank you. Bye.